In this video I will tell you about the driving forces behind the turmoils in the Ukraine. First of all, let's see what these dirty mainstream media are doing at the moment. The Western media are showing over and over again how innocent protesters get shot by the Ukrainian regime and about the Russian armed forces threatening world peace. And the Russian media and RT, Russia Today, show the opposite. How the West has organized the uprising using Nazi organizations like the Right Sector, that the Ukrainian revolution is a Nazi coup. So here we can witness how these damned media of the financial elite are telling entirely contradictory stories to play the peoples out against each other by aristocracies' divide and rule techniques. And yet, the real story behind the curtains is still an entirely different one, not told by either of the opposing medias. If any of these media had any conscience, they wouldn't do this. But they haven't. It's the way they are. This is World War II propaganda full of lies from both sides all over again. And both stories told are a lie, meant to destabilize and sow the seeds of hatred and bloodshed. I'll tell you what the real story is and who's behind it. Let's look at some dates first, showing that Octagon of the Templars and their Swiss Nazi banks are behind it all. On October 15, 2013, the OECD deal with the Swiss banks was signed, which was the very end of the Swiss Nazi banking secret. So Octagon and the Swiss Nazi Templars of the motherland issued the worldwide order to their worldwide web of Freemasons, to which Russian President Vladimir Putin responded by releasing the oligarch Khodorkovsky shortly after, on December 20th, 2013, directly betraying the Russian people by his act. He waited just before the Olympic Games of Sochi, so everybody accepted the release as a sign of goodwill. Very smart, Mr. Putin, you little devil. Then hardly 1 week released, the Volgograd terrorist attacks took place on December the 29th, 2013. The time to pull a few strings. Then 2 days later, on December the 31st, 2013, the deadline of the US Justice Department concerning Swiss banking crimes ended. And we can see how interactive all the international events are with the pressure on Octagon and the Nazi banks. 5 days later, on January the 5th, 2014, Khodorkovsky flew to Switzerland, and not really to see his children, whom he hadn't seen in liberty for 10 years, because after only 5 days he had enough of them. And on January 10th he flew to Israel. He thanked the Swiss Justice Department for protecting his money in the Swiss banks he had stolen from the Russian people. Putin let him out so he could transfer the money away from the dying Swiss banks just in time. Wonder how much Putin got out of it. Then, only 6 days later, on January 16, 2014, the oligarch President Yanukovych of the Ukraine and fellow oligarch and friend with Khodorkovsky issued anti-protest laws, consolidating the Ukrainian dictatorship and increasing the pressure on its people. 1 week later, on January the 22nd, the first people died on the streets of the Ukraine. And all turmoil in the Ukraine started on November 30th, 2013, when Ukrainian riot police raided peaceful student protesters only 1 month after the OECD treaty with Octagon's banks. The Swiss Nazi banks want war, which they see as their only way out and while they, as usually, hide away in the Alps while the rest of the world dies. And when we see how Putin released one of Russia's biggest enemies, it's therefore no surprise that Edward Snowden gets protection of the Russian oligarchs with their Swiss bank accounts. Here it becomes clear how the silent Putin betrays his people. He just tells them what they want to hear, but in fact plays for the financial elite with their oligarch friends like Yanukovych, Khodorkovsky and PSYOP agent for the financial elite Snowden. So on this picture you can see those Berkut killers with the sniper rifle of the Ukraine. You see them kneeling and they're begging for mercy, while they still show their octagon symbol just behind. So symbols don't lie, folks, and we can see exactly the same symbol here at the entrance of Yanukovych's house, which was built by the Swiss. I'll show it to you later, just in a minute. So don't show mercy on these guys, because they don't deserve it. They'll do it again and again. They just put on another uniform and find themselves a new name and do it all over again. Do not show mercy, because they won't have it for us. And only a handful of people in the US put pressure on the Nazi banks of the Swiss Templars, like Senators Carl Levin and John McCain, and a handful of good men in the NSA, CIA, IRS and FBI, which are of course overall rotten and infiltrated organizations with Octagon's fifth column within. It must be clear now that the Nazi banks of Octagon, Switzerland, steer the turmoils in the Ukraine, with Yanukovych robbing his own people, bringing the money on some Swiss banks. But why did the pharaohs of the financial elite choose the Ukraine? Well, the answer is the Syria conflict, and there probably won't be any war in the Ukraine. But Russia has to pull out military resources out of the Mediterranean near Syria into the Black Sea to the Crimea of the Ukraine. So finally, the onslaught on the Syrian Alawites and plans of the New World Order can have their go for the Islamic conquest over the Syrian Alawite nation, while Russia is occupied elsewhere because of rather domestic dangers inflicted upon by the very same enemy. And the whole Islamofascism has been set in place by Octagon's grey eminences as François Genoux, Ahmed Huber al-Swissri, Gary Müller and others behind the screens. Nowhere else in the world Hitler's book Mein Kampf is being read, copied, multiplied and published more than in the Muslim world, thanks to the numerous Swiss sleeper agents and Octagon fifth column agitators. It's very easy to manipulate the public and set up peoples against each other, which the media are doing at the moment. You send in some PSYOPs operators with some fascist symbols on the jackets, doing some Hitler salutes, and show some right sector, right-wing crisis actors, and then show them on Russian TV over and over again. And on the other side, in the West, they only show how bad and aggressive Russia is. This is a long time organized setup, folks, in order to get on with the Syrian agenda, and all led by Octagon, the Swiss banks, financial elite, oligarchs and the fair aristocracy. And just like this one here, on Russian TV and Western TV, we probably see, in connection with the Ukraine, the same crisis actors as we can see here. Does anyone know that the Ukraine spent $9.8 billion on the arms trade with China in 2012? Money offered by the US and NATO because they won't and can't intervene military. So they use the same Afghan tactics, when in the 80s 900,000 Chinese-made Kalashnikovs with no serial numbers and paid by US tax dollars, or rather Kovab's drugs money, got delivered to the Mujahideen to fight the Russians, and finally, together with some famous US surface-to-air heat-seeking missiles called Stingers, broke the neck of the USSR. There you can see it, yeah. 9.8 billion, there it says. Well, that's a hell of a lot. I was personally there in Afghanistan in 1985, spent a year there and saw it happen. Same things happen now. Now the US Army tries to recollect their gift without telling ordinary soldiers that they're being shot at with US financed weaponry in Afghanistan. They don't say us nothing, they hide it all. And then this one, it's a nice one too. Ukraine was the 4th largest arms exporter in the world in 2012. The 4th biggest in the world. So the Ukraine was exporting bloodshed to the world and to other dictators and... oh, nice. They hide everything from us, and so does Putin and the media who tell us shit. Putin's ancestry has been erased and is a mystery. But we do know that his grandfather was a cook for Lenin and remained so for Lenin's wife after Lenin died. Lenin, who spent time in Octagon as well. And he even was a cook for Stalin. And Stalin was so paranoid that he would never have someone who's not a dedicated member of the PRA lay hands on his food with the possibility of poisonous assassination. So Putin was born into the circles of power. So he's one of them, all right, telling the Russian people what they want to hear, knowing that Russians hate all these homosexuals' perversions, so they love him for that. But why then did he have all those Chechens massacred who are devoted Muslims and smell a queer from a mile before they hang him? And this Russian Putin Tsar liberated the worst criminals, rapists, murderers and serial killers from Russian high-security hard labor camps in return for joining the Russian army in Chechnya, and who got known by the Russians and the Chechens under the name of Kontraktniki. Here you can read it, Kontraktniki, K-O, and there's an N-T-R-A. The rest I don't know what it means. While those brave Chechen fighters, when they caught a 19-year-old Russian conscript, they had him call up his mother to come and pick him up, which they did actually, and release the kid. This is who Putin really is, and he fosters the very same perverted homo agenda as his New World Order pals in the West do, knowing Russia needs some more time and a couple of more wars to duly accept that New World Order homo agenda. Now Putin calls the Ukrainians a brother people with the Russians. I wonder to whom he thinks he's lying to, because I don't think that the Ukrainians have forgotten the Holodomor of 1932 and 33, when at least 7.5 million Ukrainians and their children were deliberately starved to death by Stalin and the Soviets. The Ukrainian word Holodomor means hunger by death and has been officially recognized by the world since 2006. Stalin had the Bolsheviki and Russian army steal all